Well, welcome everyone. I'm so excited for you guys to be joining Dr. Tiffany Mullen and myself tonight. So Tiffany, I got to tell you the backstory, like how she and I know each other. We go way back. See if you can stick with me. She's the sister-in-law of my sister.
That's not confusing.
That's the easiest way to do it. Yeah, I think when you and I first talked, not that like within the last year, you had a much more elaborate way of explaining how we were connected.
Yeah. Not confusing at all, right?
So we've known each other for a while. So we've been in the family for a while, but it's been probably over this last year that Dr. Tiffany and I reconnected professionally, just chatting, because she's a functional medicine doctor and she was ahead of the time. So even pre-pandemic, when everything went virtual, she had already created a virtual practice. And so she's going to fill us in a little bit more about the practice and how all states are now represented in regards to the docs that she has on her team to support that. But very excited to be working with her. She is an amazing practitioner and human being. Funny as all get out, but also just super smart and realistic when working with our collaborative patients and clients. And today, we talked about her coming on board and talking about a topic, and what better than hormones.
Yeah.
With women, I mean, we know that we are multi-layered, and our spouses or significant others will probably vouch for that things are pretty complex. And so she's going to help us dial it in and really understand how this all works together. But I want to turn it over to Dr. Tiffany and have her share a little bit more about her story, and then get into a presentation. We will have time at the end. Janice, if you don't mind going on mute.
Oh, I thought I was, sorry.
No worries at all. And just have time for questions and answers. So jot down any questions that you have in the meantime. Again, you're going to learn a lot. I do every time we chat. And so off to you, Dr. Tiffany.
Thank you very much, Cindy, for all those nice comments. And I would say back at you, because I learned so much from you. Cindy and I actually see patients together in our practice. And man, I mean, I am so lucky to have you on our team. It is such, I mean, you have taught me so much. I've learned a tremendous amount from you. So just as Cindy said, I'm a functional medicine physician. I'm actually boarded in family medicine and integrative medicine, but functionally medicine trained. I am the CEO and co-founder of Vital Health. We're based in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. But as Cindy said, we actually have a team of physicians that can see patients across the country. And we set up the company on purpose that way before COVID, before everyone was kind of doing video and Zoom for everything, because we realized that a lot of us don't have functional medicine doctors in our neighborhoods right around the corner, or even across town, or even within a couple of hours of driving. And so the idea was to be able to take the best practitioners from across the country and be able to serve those up to anybody across the country, even if that person isn't even in the same neighborhood, city, state as you. So accessibility was really the idea. And being able to have people have a better experience with healthcare than I think most of us have come to unfortunately expect in the traditional healthcare system, which has not, served most of us well. We're going to be talking about hormones today. I am a woman I'm a woman. Need I say more? No, I'm kidding. I'm a postmenopausal woman, so I've had the distinct honor of having traversed the whole spectrum from, beginning to end. Well, I'm not at my end yet. I'm just getting started. But, just understanding that the transition to all of the different phases of a woman's life is so interesting and fraught with potential pitfalls. And when I designed this talk, what I really wanted to talk about was the stress common denominator, because stress is such a common factor across the board. We all have it, we all experience it, we all struggle with this, and certainly the pandemic has not helped in this regard. And so I think understanding that stress is a big part of how we become hormonally well, no matter where you are in your hormonal journey, is really important. And in case there are any husbands, boyfriends, sons, partners eavesdropping on our conversation, because they're not supposed to be here. No, I'm kidding. They actually can take away a lot of the same information. It's just different hormones, right? Then we're not talking about estrogen and progesterone for them. We're talking about testosterone, but everything else applies across the board to everyone. So I have a presentation to share. Am I on share mode, Cindy? Am I set? Okay. And I will definitely take questions. There is a chat feature here in Zoom at the very bottom. If y'all have questions that just cannot wait until the very end, if you hit that chat and text in your message, your question, I can see those pop up. You can't throw things at me, unfortunately. So, and I'm going to share my screen here. All right, so we are going to talk about dancing hormones. And we're going to talk about the adrenal connection. Again, getting to stress is sort of one of the main drivers of the way that hormones become imbalanced. And what I want you to walk away from is the fact that you cannot take a single hormone and put it in its own little spot and talk about it as an isolated entity. They're all together all the time. Hormones are messaging chemicals, right? They talk to each other. And so that's why when I talk about dancing hormones, I'm talking about the fact that there is this intercommunication amongst hormones and therefore their effects on the body that is really important to understand. So what are we going to do? We're going to talk about how stress impacts hormones, especially of the adrenal glands, which are the glands that sit on top of the kidneys. We're going to get into some physiology. There will be a quiz. No, I'm kidding, there won't be. We're going to talk about how the adrenal glands, the thyroid glands, and in our case, the ovaries function normally, and then how all of these hormones, cortisol, thyroid hormones, estrogen, and progesterone, all intertwine with one another. And then we're going to get into some really interesting stuff, I think, at the end of this talk about gut health and some of the things that you wouldn't maybe think about as being reasons for hormonal problems. We're going to get into a little bit of genomic stuff. Some of the things that we don't necessarily think about as being sort of part and parcel or core to why people have hormone imbalances and certain symptoms. So hopefully there'll be some stuff in here between talking about traditional hormones as well as the stuff at the end that'll really help you understand how hormones work better. I like to always sort of talk about hormones and do talks in general, thinking about a patient. So let's walk through a typical patient that I would see in my practice, Elizabeth, who's 52. And she comes in to Vital Health with fatigue that has been really bad. She's had difficulty sleeping. She doesn't feel refreshed when she wakes up. She feels like she's walking around in a brain fog. She does have some gut symptoms, bloating, loose stools. She's now having some hot flashes in the daytime and sweating at night. Her libido is gone in the tanker. She's gained some belly weight. She's got palpitations going on. Her hair is thinning. She's got dry skin, and she's kind of like, she's been a person who's exercised and ran, but she's all of a sudden, she's like, I just can't exercise as hard as I used to. Over in her life, she has 3 teenagers. She's working full time. She has a really stressful job. She's trying to exercise regularly. She does eat really well. Fruits, vegetables, healthy proteins and fats, but she's thinking that maybe some foods bother her gut. She's not sure. She craves salt and sugar. She does have a family history of thyroid disorder and her sister hypothyroidism, and she's had some irregular menstrual cycles for 9 months and no period for 3 months. So she's starting to enter into that sort of perimenopausal phase where she's still seeing a cycle, but it's been really irregular and unpredictable. So what could be going on? So as a doctor, here's what I'm thinking. Could it be adrenal? Could it be her thyroid? Could it be estrogen, progesterone in the perimenopause? Could it be all of them? This is how I'm going to start to unpack Elizabeth. Before I do, I want to get everybody on the page of what stress is, because I think we all go like, okay, stress is a feeling, stress is an experience, but I want to talk about what is stress from a distinct standpoint of when we talk about it in the body and the mind, what is it? So if you look it up in the dictionary, it's a state of mental or emotional strain or tension resulting from adverse or very demanding circumstances. Well, I kind of don't buy this, because I don't really think that we have to have adverse or very demanding circumstances to necessarily feel stress, right? We all have stresses that can result from, even good things can cause us stress. Moving, getting a new job, So it doesn't necessarily have to be something that's difficult. It can just be something that is causing us to feel some degree of tension. So let's talk about the different types of stress. When we look at this kind of a situation, what is happening here? Truck is coming right at us. What we're talking about here is the type of protection that stress offers us. So when we look at the adrenal gland, which is this nice little snow cap sitting on top of both of your kidneys, you are getting, and when a truck comes at you, you are getting a squirt of adrenaline and noradrenaline from that adrenal glands. And we call that fight or flight. That is what you feel when you have those butterflies in your stomach, when something happens to you, somebody cuts you off on the road, somebody jumps out from behind a corner. That is a protective mechanism. It is completely involuntary, and it protects us. It either tells us to run away or grip the steering wheel tighter, steer off to the side, our pupils dilate, our muscles tighten, we start to sweat. Those are things that will protect us. And this is a very critical function for our adrenal glands. But what about this poor woman? This is probably how most of us feel, right? We're juggling tons of stuff, kids, finances, relationships, work, bills, things that go ping and ding at us all day long. These are stressors that I think modern society has created, especially for women who are carrying, the lion's share of managing households and families. So what is happening in the case of this poor woman? Life. So if you look at the adrenal gland again, what is happening for her is that her adrenal gland is producing a hormone called cortisol. And you probably all have heard of cortisol. Cortisol is considered a chronic stress hormone. And because of the fact that it's considered a chronic stress hormone, it is sort of given a bad rap because we think of it as always a negative thing. But cortisol also is protective, because why else would our bodies produce something if it wasn't protective? Cortisol's job is to actually help with wound healing. So had we been injured in that car wreck that happened a couple of slides ago, our cortisol would have actually been introduced into the body and would have actually started a process of deflaming and creating wound healing. So it does actually serve a function in the body. And so what we like to see with cortisol is that it's managed in the way that it should, which is that it's sometimes high and sometimes low. And we'll go over that in a second. But not that it's high or low all the time. That's where we start talking about problems with cortisol. And when we're talking about problems with cortisol, what we're actually talking about is something called adrenal fatigue, which some of you have probably heard. In a classic adrenal fatigue situation, the person feels tired all the time. A lot of times they lean on caffeine to get going. They're feeling tired and wired. So when somebody tells me that they're exhausted, but they lay down and their eyes just pop open at night and they feel totally wired, that is a classic adrenal fatigue symptom. Difficulty focusing, that brain fog thing. Belly weight gain is super common with adrenal fatigue. Cortisol does tend to cause us to put on belly weight. It's a protective mechanism again. Sometimes mood swings, anxiety, depression, and then digestive issues can also be an adrenal fatigue symptom. So what's happening in the body is that I want to back up from the adrenal glands. We actually have two glands in our brain. So this is a brain cut in half. There's a gland here that sits right behind the eyeball. So if you can picture, here's the eyeball on somebody. Right behind that is this gland called the hypothalamus. That's the master gland, which has a direct connection to this little dangling pedunculated gland called the pituitary gland, which probably some of you have heard of. And pituitary gland is another driver of hormone function throughout the body. And so when you put that together with another gland that's right behind that pituitary gland, you start to get a sense of why stress impacts the function of these hormones. There is that gland behind, or that part of the brain that's right behind the pituitary, that's called the amygdala. And the amygdala is a place in the brain that processes emotional overlays. It is the place where we store memories, or part of where we store memories. It's also stored in the limbus. And so these are incredibly important, interesting things, that these particular structures would be right next to each other in the brain. And so one could say that there's actually an overlay between stress and the way that we respond to stress, as well as how our hormones are impacted that way. I like to do this little experiment with people because I think it really drives home how our bodies respond to our internal thinking about things. And so one of the things that I want you to do right now is I want you to close your eyes, and I'm going to talk you through a little description of something. So I want you to close your eyes and picture you picking up a lemon from your kitchen table in your hand and holding it in your hand and bringing it up to your nose and taking a big, deep inhalation of the lemon. Now you're putting the lemon down on a cutting board, and you're taking a knife and you're slicing into that lemon, and you're seeing all the juices kind of flow out of that lemon and onto the cutting board. And then you're picking up that half of a lemon and you're bringing that back up to your nose, and you're smelling that deep citrusy smell of the lemon, and then squeezing a little drop of that lemon right onto your tongue. Okay, now I want you to open your eyes, and I can't see all of you, but I'm guessing the majority of you may have experienced some mouth watering during that experiment. And so I'm guessing that maybe everyone that's attending this presentation, except for maybe Cindy, who's probably in the background cooking, does not have actually a lemon in front of them, right? So you can see that the brain and imagination are incredibly powerful. You actually made your own mouth water just by picturing the lemon. And that is a physiologic function. So you can imagine that our minds, as we start to create thoughts, can have actual impact on the brain. So it's a simple experiment, but it is a really profound thing to think about how much our thinking impacts how our bodies work. So when we talk about adrenal fatigue, what we're actually talking about is something called HPA axis dysfunction, which is a big, huge thing, big, huge combination of words. Easier to say adrenal fatigue, which is why we talk about adrenal fatigue. But what we're talking about is hypothalamus, pituitary, and adrenal. That's where HPA comes from. And the interplay between those parts of the brain, those glands in the brain, and the adrenal glands, and the fact that there's this back and forth mechanism where the hypothalamus is releasing a hormone called CRH, which triggers the pituitary to release ACTH, which then goes down to the adrenals through the bloodstream and releases cortisol and adrenaline to a certain extent. And this constant pounding of the adrenals by this back and forth mechanism is actually what we think drives HPA axis dysfunction. That there is so much demand constantly on the adrenals that they actually start to fry over time. Not literally, they're not smoking like this picture, but they're literally starting to shut down because the hypothalamus and pituitary are asking and demanding of them so much. So that's what we think is behind HPA axis dysfunction or adrenal fatigue. So this is another way of looking at it. Stress hits the HPA axis, the adrenal gland produces a couple of hormones called DHEA and cortisol. That feeds back up into the hypothalamus and pituitary, and there's this constant conversation going on between these glands. When we look at this very, very detailed and busy slide, I don't want you to get overwhelmed here, but you can see where cortisol and DHEA sit in the production of hormones. Progesterone, testosterone, and estrogen are all smack in the middle of this whole thing. And we're going to come back to this regularly, this particular diagram, but I want you to see how all of these hormones interplay with one another, because that begins to help you understand why cortisol and DHEA are in the mix of this entire situation. So here, I don't know if you can see my pointer, but here's cortisol in red, DHEA in red, and then you have testosterone coming off in the sort of light blue area, estrogens down in the gray, progesterones in the purple, and then actually some other hormones that the adrenals make having to do with fluid balance over in the left yellow area. So very much an important part of how hormones are made. So how do we evaluate adrenal function when we're talking about a functional medicine approach? What I want you to understand is that there are times when we actually want our cortisol to be high and times when we want it to be low. And so that is called a normal cortisol diurnal rhythm. So if you look at this test, which is actually a saliva test, and you can measure cortisol with saliva, urine, you can do blood, you can actually do injectables and measure blood. But the way that I typically like to do it is through saliva testing at 4 times of the day. So you can see the time on the bottom, 7 to 9 a.m., 11 to 1, 3 to 5, 10 to 12. If you take a saliva sample at different times of the day, you would expect there to be a higher level first thing in the morning and sort of a decrease of cortisol through the rest of the day. That's what a normal cortisol rhythm looks like. when we start talking about the stages of adrenal fatigue, of which there are 3, with stage 1, we have a high morning cortisol value. And these are folks that feel anxious when they wake up, tired and wired. They have weight gain because of cortisol in the morning and some difficulty focusing. So that's stage 1, higher morning cortisol. Stage 2, we actually start to see highs and lows. So we might start off with a borderline high and then dip down too low. And again, some of the symptoms are have fairly significant crossover with stage 1. But I see a lot of people who have this irritable midday slump where after lunch, they're just toast. They can't do work. They're just, they start hitting the caffeine again at like 1 o'clock in the afternoon because they just can't get through the day. That's a typical stage 2. Stage 3, which I, have not seen a ton of, thankfully, but man, when we see stage 3, these folks are really exhausted all the time, and almost to the point where they can't work or really get out of bed. Very, very significantly exhausted, cannot exercise at all, really bad brain fog. A lot of this gets mistaken as chronic fatigue syndrome. We might actually see some crossover nowadays into people who have long haul COVID. So this is a pretty significant problem when people are at stage 3 adrenal fatigue. So when I see patients with stage 1 and 2, what I'm trying to do is keep them from getting here, because this is a lot harder to treat and obviously much more symptomatic. So when we look at Elizabeth's cortisol and her DHEA, which is another hormone that helps make cortisol and other hormones, we can see that she's actually about a stage 2. She's got some low cortisols, she's got some normal cortisols, but she looks pretty pooped out, right? She's got some adrenal problems for sure. So when we talk about how do we approach treating adrenal fatigue, I always like to go with natural first. So I like to talk about what are the foods that we can put into place that actually support adrenal function. Higher protein foods, obviously phytonutrients in fruits and vegetables, high fiber and plenty of water are really helpful. And then we'll talk about some supplements, but really the B vitamins are very important for adrenal function. And things that are hard on the adrenals are processed foods, white sugar and flour, caffeine. So even though it's sort of instinctual for us to want to hit the caffeine to try to get through the day, that actually just makes the situation worse. And obviously alcohol, which is somewhat toxic to the GI tract and also hormonal problems is something that's not helpful for adrenal function. From a lifestyle perspective, sleeping is key. Mindful meditation, even just mindfulness, even if you're not sitting and meditating for 10, 20, 30 minutes, just dropping in and breathing for a minute can be so helpful in resetting the stress response. Appropriate exercise, and I use the word appropriate because this is not the time when you want to be doing 30, 50, 60 minutes of HIIT 7 days a week. You want to have rest days. You want to have days where you're doing yoga or just taking gentle walks, and making sure, as women particularly, that you have time to yourself, that you find time to be quiet, relaxed, and you don't have people hitting you up for something all the time. Protected time, whether you have to like disappear into a closet. I'm not going to be judging you on that. I disappear. I go into my bathroom and lock the door. It's really important to have that quiet time. What doesn't help with a lifestyle, too much sleep, trying to deal with toxic relationships, not good, not easy to deal with, but not good either. Aggressive exercise and being go, 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 and just trying to push through never helps solve anything when it comes to adrenal function. Some supplements. So when we treat adrenals, and this is why it's really important to study and do that testing, that saliva testing or whatever form of testing you end up doing, it helps us choose what is the best approach. Some of these herbs that we use, like ashwagandha, panax, ginseng, rhodiola, licorice, there are others, have different properties when it comes to adrenal function. And so some of them are stimulating to the adrenal glands when the cortisol is low. Some of them are calming to the adrenal glands when cortisol is high. So we really want to kind of customize and make sure that we're treating when your cortisol is high, when it's low, we're giving you the right combination of things. As I mentioned earlier, B vitamins are important, but also C, D, zinc, and copper are really important for adrenal function. If somebody's having sleep issues, we can do a lot of natural stuff here to try to help with sleep: phosphatidylserine, L-theanine, valerian, 5-HTP, melatonin, GABA, magnesium. Not all of them, but we can really, customize an approach to sleep. And then sometimes we actually go for hormonal support, especially in those stage 3 folks, where we're actually giving DHEA supplements and even glandular extracts. Sometimes I actually have some patients who I've had to place on prescription hydrocortisone for adrenal support because their adrenals were so bad. So sometimes we actually do get out the prescription pad as well. So going back to Elizabeth, is that the whole story? Well, she did throw some symptoms at us that may also make us be thinking about low thyroid or hypothyroidism, such as weak fatigue, weight gain, her thinning and dry hair and nails, feeling cold all the time, constipation, irregular periods can be from hypothyroidism. And so again, going back to this idea of interplay between hypothalamus and pituitary, those master glands, and then the gland out of the body, in this case, the thyroid. So there's actually also an axis that describes the hypothalamus pituitary thyroid called the HPT axis, where the thyroid and those two glands in the brain are having a two-way conversation with each other. So this is a very busy slide, but bear with me because I think a lot of people are really interested in how the thyroid actually works. So what ends up happening with the thyroid is the hypothalamus releases thyroid releasing hormone, which hits the pituitary. The pituitary is actually the hormone that creates thyroid stimulating hormone, TSH, which probably a lot of you have heard of before. That goes down to the thyroid, and then the thyroid actually creates 95% T4, which goes to the liver or kidney and actually becomes activated T3, which is the hormone that actually drives our thyroid function in our body. We also make a little bit of reverse T3, which tends to be inactive. And then we actually also create a little bit of T3 directly, about 5% from the thyroid. So there is a negative feedback mechanism. If the thyroid is doing just fine, it'll tell the pituitary to shut off the TSH. So the lower the TSH, the more hyper your thyroid is, and the higher the TSH, the more hypo your thyroid is. It's reverse. So a lot of people need to kind of remind themselves that a high TSH isn't necessarily a good thing. It could actually mean that you're running a little bit on the hypothyroid side. It also speaks to the fact that we really need to understand beyond the TSH what's happening with thyroid function. So I don't like it that traditional physicians only measure TSH. I really want to see T3 and T4. I want to see how those are balanced, and sometimes also reverse T3 when we talk about really understanding the thyroid. And so again, when we talk about stress, stress directly impacts the hypothalamus and the pituitary, which can actually impact the adrenal function, as we talked about earlier. And there is a crossover between that adrenal function and thyroid. So cortisol actually negatively impacts TSH directly. It can actually decrease T3 and make more reverse T3. And it can actually obviously function as a reverse, as a cutoff to hypothalamus and pituitary function as well. So there is a direct correlation between stress and how well your thyroid works. Thus the dance of the thyroid hormones, or thus the dance of the hormones in general. So how do we evaluate thyroid function? This is a little fuzzy. I apologize. I did a screenshot for this, but when we look at thyroid function, again, I'm not a fan of just looking at TSH. I really want to understand what's happening with the free hormones, the T3 and the T4 that I mentioned. I also really like to see what's happening with some of the antibodies, which are sometimes a driver behind thyroid function, especially when it's autoimmune. And some of the support molecules like iodine and thyroglobulin, which is T4, can also be, so this is a very comprehensive test. It's done off of a finger stick at home. And you can see that her TSH actually, Elizabeth's TSH was actually kind of on the high side. And now you understand that that actually means she's really kind of sitting on the hypothyroid side of things. If you look at her free T3, it's not being marked with an H, but if you look at the range, it's sitting right at the bottom of that range, 2.5 to 6.5, she's 2.5. So she's barely in the range with that circulating free T3, which is doing all the work for her thyroid. So she definitely has some thyroid issues going on. So what will we do with her? Typically, when we treat low thyroid, we're treating with medications, of which there are many. Most physicians will offer something called Synthroid or levothyroxine. That's a T4 only medication. And some people don't convert T4 into T3 very well. So we can add T3, which is a separate medication called Cytomel or liothyronine. We can actually do T3 and T4 combinations of medications, something called Armour Thyroid. There's also NP Thyroid, Westheroid, and Nature-Thyroid. That's my favorite place to start, is a fixed combination of T3 and T4. We can compound and customize thyroid medication in any way, shape, or form we want. And I do that sometimes in my practice, as do my colleagues. And then if there is an autoimmune component like Hashimoto's, we use something called low-dose naltrexone, which is a very interesting compounded medication that can actually modulate or change the immune status of hypothyroidism as well as other forms of autoimmunity. So think of LDN if you have autoimmune problems going on. And then we really focus on thyroid nutritional support in terms of what we eat as well as supplements that we take. We want to make sure there's plenty of selenium, magnesium, iron, and iodine for thyroid support. So let's switch gears now to hormones and talk about the hypothalamus pituitary ovarian axis, or the HPO axis. If you're a guy, this would be a testicular HPT axis. Again, conversation between estrogen, progesterone, the hormones that the pituitary and the hypothalamus are making, and that constant conversation that's happening between these organs. So how does it work? Well, hypothalamus releases gonadotropin releasing hormone to the pituitary, which releases luteinizing hormone and follicle stimulating hormone in women who are ovulating, that go down to the ovaries. Estrogen, progesterone are released, ovulation happens, and there's all this feedback that happens between all of these hormones. So that's in somebody who's ovulating. So here again is that steroidogenic pathway that puts DHEA and cortisol smack in the middle of the production of progesterone and estrogen, as well as testosterone, if there's any guys listening. So if you look at stress and how it impacts the production of estrogen and progesterone, first of all, we're not getting a lot of DHEA produced, and therefore our estrogen is impacted. You'll recall those are really important in terms of our hormonal function. Most of the symptoms that we feel when we are experiencing hormone-related symptoms as women. And there is a phenomenon that we think is happening, something called cortisol steal, where instead of making estrogen and progesterone, we're actually making more and more cortisol. And I see a lot of guys who present this way. They're stressed out and they actually have very low testosterone levels. And when we fix their cortisol, those things just naturally get better. So here's testosterone, as you can see, sitting out in this blue area. So there's definitely a dance between all of the hormones and cortisol, as I hope you can kind of understand how all these things are moving together. The list of hormone-related deficiency symptoms is huge, and probably all of us have experienced some of these. Some of them are estrogen deficiency primarily, some of them are progesterone deficiency, but a lot of the symptoms that Elizabeth, our pretend patient that we're talking about today, these are definitely things that we can attribute to deficiencies in progesterone and estrogen. There's obviously symptoms that are progesterone and estrogen excess as well, that are certainly something that we would want to know and treat if that was the case in a particular patient. So if we look at how sex hormones, i.e. progesterone, estrogen, testosterone affect thyroid function, there is a certain kind of protein that we have in our bloodstream that actually carries thyroid hormone around. Hormones are fats, so they need to be attached to a protein in order to be able to surf through the bloodstream. And when we have problems with thyroid binding globulin, which is what TBG is, that can actually impact our estradiol level. Same thing with testosterone and progesterone. So if we have circulating problems with thyroid hormone, we can actually directly impact our estrogen, testosterone, and progesterone levels just by impacting that carrier molecule. Estradiol also lowers TSH independently and increases T3 and T4 independently. So again, even without cortisol and adrenals in the mix, there is an effect of thyroid on the estrogen levels as well. So how do we evaluate hormonal function? There's a lot of different ways. This happens to be a salivary measurement, but you can do urine hormones, you can do blood hormones. There's lots of different ways you could do it. But you can see with Elizabeth, her estrogen, which is measured by estradiol, our prominent estrogen hormone, progesterone to estradiol ratio, all very low. Her testosterone is in the normal range, but she's obviously experiencing some perimenopausal symptoms, and it's pretty clear that it's being driven by her estrogen and progesterone. How do we manage the symptoms? Well, we always try to go ahead and do support that's natural if we can in the beginning. We use things like black cohosh, chaste tree berry, something called Vitex, diindolylmethane, which is called DIM or DIM, can be very helpful. Sometimes we actually go to hormones. We use traditional hormones, estradiol tablets, patches, progesterone tablets, patches. We can use bioidenticals, things like creams, pellets, things like that. And then obviously we want to support lifestyle because that's a critically important part of helping the entire hormonal system heal. So I'm always kind of like the broken record here, talking about sleep, talking about exercise, talking about nutrition, and obviously managing stress. So Elizabeth is kind of all of the above. She has estrogen, progesterone deficiency. She's got adrenal fatigue. She's got hypothyroidism. So where would I start with her? I'm back to sort of the very beginning of this talk, where if we don't correct her adrenal glands and manage her stress, we're probably not going to get too far with everything else. So I would definitely be working on those adrenal glands with some of the adaptogens, some of the lifestyle changes that we discussed, some of the support supplements, B vitamins, etc. And then we would probably be supporting thyroid and hormones, but we could potentially get her feeling better just by managing her adrenal glands. And that's one of the things I want to drive home is that we don't necessarily want to start at the top of the period. Oh yeah, hormones are dancing. I love this slide. We don't want to start at the top of the pyramid when somebody's coming in with menopause. We really want to talk about adrenals as being the basis of our treatment, focusing on getting stress managed first, then thyroid, and then sex hormones. So when I'm thinking through Elizabeth's case, I'm approaching her, yes, based on some of the things that she thinks are the most important symptoms to solve, but I'm going to be treating her stress. I'm going to be addressing her adrenal fatigue. And then under this pyramid, I'm going to be looking at some other things that we talked about at the beginning, some of the symptoms that she's having. She has some gut symptoms. She may have some insulin resistance symptoms, and she may also have some genetics going on. So we might unpack this a little bit further. And so now I'm going to make you uber smart. If you knew everything that I just talked about and you're like, yeah, Mullen, I know all this stuff about cortisol. I know all this stuff about estrogen, progesterone, been there, done that. Hopefully this other stuff will be new and cutting edge to you. But there is a very important thing about gut. And when we're talking about functional medicine doctors are obsessed with gut function. Gut drives everything. So when we look at poor digestive stuff, I want to know what's going on in Elizabeth's gut because she may have food sensitivities. She may have infections. She may have gluten sensitivity and celiac disease. And those are incredibly important. If I don't know about those things, I could be worsening her autoimmunity. I could be decreasing her production of serotonin, 70 to 80% of which comes from the gut. That can lead to mood problems. That can lead to sleep problems. So we really want to be digging in and getting to root cause here and thinking about some of the other things that might be going on with her. So I would be doing stool testing on her. I would be looking at food sensitivities, et cetera. And then insulin sensitivity also is a really common thing that happens in women who have adrenal problems, who are hitting midlife particularly. So I'd be evaluating what's called a hemoglobin A1C, which helps us decide where people are on the spectrum of insulin sensitivity, a fasting insulin level, and really digging into the lipid panel, including not just the traditional cholesterol and LDL and HDL, but also some of the other less common things that we do, particle size and particle behavior, so we can understand her risk for cardiovascular disease. Because as you know, right at menopause is where women and men are right neck and neck in terms of their cardiovascular risk. Now, this is another really, really, really busy slide. I want you to sort of ignore the left side. This is a Dutch test, which is a urine test, fascinating test that we can really kind of dig in and see how hormones are detoxified. And there are several what we call single nucleotide polymorphisms, or SNPs, which is an easier way to say that tell us a lot about how a woman, and also men, metabolize estrogen and metabolize and detoxify everything in the body. And some of those SNPs are here. I'm listing them: CYP3A4, 1B1, 1A1. I know these are just kind of like random things that I'm saying, but some of you have heard of probably MTHFR, really important detoxification, COMT. Some of these SNPs and enzymes that we test for have a lot to do with how well we oxidize and antioxidize things. So these are things that can be done very simply off of a saliva test and really understanding genetically how we metabolize. And this is critically important for the woman who has a family history of breast cancer, let's say, and we're trying to decide if she is a good candidate for hormone therapy. I would really want to know how well she manages estrogen, and then I would really want to be backfilling and protecting her from potential estrogen damage. Again, busy, but there's not just supplement things. There's actually foods that we can do that can change the way that some of these genetic things are expressed. You'll start to see in these gray boxes, if we wanted to make an enzyme work better, we could actually put in place some foods and things like grapefruit and hops and bioflavonoids and cruciferous vegetables. And all of a sudden we're talking about making some tweaks to the diet. And this is where Cindy is so helpful in really impacting how hormones are created and how well they're detoxed in the body. You could do that with supplements as well, but there is so much room for being able to mitigate how your genes are expressed. We call that nutrigenomics. It's not just what your genes, you have your genes and your genes are your genes, but how they're expressed can be impacted by food, lifestyle, supplements. It's a very profound way to actually get at fixing issues and preventing issues, more importantly. So some other snips that I'll throw at you, just because I know you're as geeky as I am. There are some SNPs, some single nucleotide polymorphisms that have to do with the conversion of T4 to T3 in thyroid. And a lot of my patients, when I have them on adequate levels of thyroid and they're still feeling really tired and kind of foggy in the brain, they oftentimes have this DIO2, which converts T4 to T3 in the brain. And so we really work on getting plenty of thyroid to the brain and supporting the brain function for thyroid. Sex hormone binding globulin has its own, that's a carrier molecule, has its own single nucleotide polymorphism. There's estrogen-related ones. There are ones that I think about when a woman is coming to me and she's saying, I really want to get on hormones because I feel like I'm, having a lot of hormone imbalance issues, but I do have this family history of blood clots. And so we can actually look at the risk of developing blood clots, what we call thromboembolism. If this particular F5 gene is present, we would probably steer away from hormones. So again, this is the kind of stuff that can be life-changing. Instead of just throwing people on hormones, let's dig in, let's understand it better. Same thing with vitamin K2 levels, which has to do with clotting, and vitamin D. We can actually understand vitamin D and how much vitamin D we need to give somebody to get their vitamin D levels. So there's a lot we can do with genomics. That might be something that's new to you. So again, I want you to remember that the stress piece and the adrenal piece is core and really important to treat and understand. You can't just ignore it and move on to like treating thyroid and estrogen, progesterone. I always do adrenal testing and treatment when it's appropriate in women and men who are presenting with hormonal imbalance. I just want to end with a little bit about Vital Health. So as I mentioned earlier, we're a Milwaukee-based company, completely online. We have no clinic, we're virtual. We're a national team of physicians who are trained in functional, integrative, and naturopathic medicine. We actually have the best nutritionist on the planet. Her name is Cindy Lockhart. You've heard of her. And we have a wonderful health coach as well. So you get a great team of people. All of our physicians are from across the country. We all have very similar training, but just different areas of expertise. And we get the best physician for you. Again, as I said earlier in the presentation, it may not be the person who's in your town, but it might be somebody who's across the country who you've never heard of before that we can make happen through our platform. So how it works is you have an initial online consultation with our doctor. We will do lab testing, some of which is done at home. As I mentioned, saliva, stool, things like that can be done at home. Some stuff is done in the lab. We'll send it to the lab. And then we actually work with our patients as part of a membership plan where they have access to the nutritionist, the health coach, and really an ongoing relationship with their doctor to get at solving their health problems and helping them to feel better, which takes some time and actually is a wonderful thing to have a whole team surrounding you with that. So with that shameless plug, I'm going to stop yakking at you. How are we doing on time? Oh, perfect. We're doing good.
You're doing awesome, Tiffany.
Yeah.
So Dr. Mullen, that was awesome. I mean, just so comprehensive and really getting, like you said, starting with the basics. So things that we've always heard, but layering on and knowing that, we are in the driver's seat to express those genes that you mentioned. And I have to say, like, the whole time you were talking, I was like, yep, that's me. I've been there, I've done that. So I think a lot of us have probably been in a lot of those case scenarios, and hopefully that resonated with you in regards to what Dr. Mullen shared today. So now you all have the ability to unmute yourself, but what I thought we could do just to help things stay a little more organized, on the bottom of your Zoom screen, it should be on the right-hand side. You should see a little emoji of a smiley face. It says reactions. If you hit that and then hit the raise hand, that'll bring you to the front. And I'll go ahead and call on you. And if you can unmute, I think that just makes it easier so we're not talking over each other. So I'd love to open it up. And Dr. Mullen is here to answer all of your intriguing questions.
Or unintriguing ones.
That too. So anyone want to raise their hand and ask a question?
Okay, looks like she's got something for us.
Amy. Yep, and I see Kay manually. Yep. So we'll start with Amy and then Kay will come to you next. So Amy, just unmute.
Hi, thanks.
Yeah. Hi, Amy.
Hi, took me a while to find the hand.
So we'll just do a manual.
Oh yes, I was about to do what Kay was gonna do and just like, all right, and just hold up my hand. So 2 questions maybe, but the second one's maybe more too large of a question. But you mentioned about MTHFR, if that's in your genes. I think I'm saying that right. That's something to be mindful of if you're going to look at hormone therapy, correct?
That's correct, because MTHFR is a really important methylation gene. It's an enzyme. So genes, when they make something, they make a protein, and the protein then becomes typically an enzyme. And an enzyme is something that causes a chemical reaction to happen in the body. We have gazillions of them. So it's kind of our machinery in the background, right? So gene, protein, enzyme. And MTHFR is actually an enzyme. So what we're doing with that is, when I like to think about methylation, I like to think about it as literally it's sticking a little flag on stuff. And when it sticks a little flag on something, it's saying to the body, get rid of that. We don't need it anymore. That sounds like it would be really important, obviously, for things coming into our bodies, like chemicals, toxins, pollutants, right? We want to get rid of all that. But we also have to get rid of our own internal stuff. If you just made estrogen and never got rid of it, you'd like explode from estrogen. So we have to be able to tag those things and get rid of them as well. And methylation is a really important step in detoxification. So MTHFR, as being a potent methylator, is in the mix there. People who have MTHFR issues don't necessarily get rid of their estrogens well. They don't get rid of their adrenaline well. They don't get rid of, there's a lot of things that are sort of accumulating in the body and just not processed as well. So that was kind of a long answer, but you're absolutely right. Methylation, of which MTHFR is a part of, can be part of this whole thing. And it's measurable. We can actually look at your function that way.
Okay. It's helpful. You have such a informative way of being so simple, like this, and this. I'm like, okay, now I can wrap my head around that a little bit. So, and that kind of ties into my second question. So I have chronic Lyme's disease, and we're working with a functional medicine, doctor, which I'm very happy. I love the dig-in method. And wondering if some of the issues with my detoxing, heavy metals, mold, Lyme's disease, if part of, we're going to do the MTHFR testing. But my mother had passed away from ovarian cancer, and my aunt had breast cancer, although they did the testing for my aunt and it wasn't the BRCA gene.
Okay.
But there's just enough caution there that I want to pay attention to that.
Totally agree with you. I would do more than MTHFR too. Think about doing an entire methylation panel.
Okay.
Which has MTHFR, has MTR, MTRR, COMT. There's a whole bunch of methylation genes. MTHFR kind of made a starring role. I think a lot of people, especially in functional medicine, those of us who geek out on this stuff, like MTHFR was like the first thing that we all kind of were like, oh, what is that? And then it's like, we realize that there's all these methylation enzymes. So understanding all of them can be really helpful because you could have a totally normal MTHFR. And if your COMT is shot, you could have terrible methylation. So have you done 23andMe or Ancestry.com? If you have, you can actually take the raw data from those and you can push it through an online tool that has a built-in algorithm that's free. And you can generate a report that gives you a pretty darn comprehensive methylation panel, as well as a detoxification panel. That's what I do with my patients.
Wow, cool.
It's a pretty easy way to do it, if they're comfortable with doing a commercially available genetic testing, which I have. I'm also a believer in contributing to science, so I don't mind. I've done my whole genome. I've thrown it out there and said, like, have fun, good luck. It's de-identified. Nobody knows it's me, but it contributes to the science and the understanding of how genes actually manifest. So if you do a commercially available test, you can take the raw data yourself and push it through geneticgenie.org and get these reports absolutely free.
Okay.
For donation,
helpful. Sorry, say that again, Cindy.
Dr. Mullen, don't they usually ask for a donation, but you don't have to?
They ask for a donation, but you don't have to. There's another site called Promethease, PROMETHEASE, which is another interrogation tool that you can use for your raw genomic data. It's like $5 or $10 a SNP. So if you wanted to go in and do like, a specific probe, in your case, like if you wanted to go in and look at all the BRCAs or look at specific, genes that are related to hormonal cancers, you could do that through Promethease.
Okay, wow.
I know, like who knew you had so much power?
I know.
Wow.
Okay. Great. Super helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, good. You're welcome.
Okay, you had a question?
I do. Dr. Mullen, this is all very interesting to somebody who was diagnosed with hyperthyroidism 20 years ago. Yeah. And I also have a large pituitary tumor. But traditional medicine isn't into this, what you're into. And I'm wondering, does your practice take any insurance, or how do you work? Is it private pay?
Yes, what we decided to do was, because insurance has been so difficult in functional medicine, what we decided to do was actually do private pay. But what we do is you can use HSA and FSA, and you can also use your out-of-network benefits. And about 70% of our patients have been successful in using their out-of-network benefits. We'll give you a super bill, you submit it to insurance and get reimbursed. So that does work sometimes. And then, the membership plan, I think, is nice because then you can spread it out over the entire year. You don't necessarily have to come up with a big upfront fee. You can actually spread out your payments. It just makes it a lot easier to access everything that you need to access on a regular basis. So it's affordable. It's not, I think everyone's got this all tied to insurance, but the unfortunate part is the insurance tethers you to care that isn't necessarily helpful for you. I'm not talking about your endocrinologist per se, but there are endocrinologists out there who really haven't gotten to the point where they can help patients. And even though their insurance company is paying for it, the patient isn't feeling better.
Yes.
So
how do we contact you if we would like to become a patient? Yeah,
so we have a website, which is a great place to start. The website is www.vitalhealth.com. And on there, you can see all of our practitioners, including the lovely Cindy. I don't know where you are in relationship to me. You're down here for me, Cindy. And there's a learning resources section that you can watch a ton of videos that I've made if you want to hear me talk more about all kinds of different things related to not just hormones, but like every topic in functional medicine, including like, how do you pay for it? How do you make it work? All those kind of things are on our website. So feel free to go there and poke around. And then there's a little chat bot on there if you want somebody to help you figure something out, or you want to schedule some time to talk to one of our folks here to kind of understand things better, maybe understand who's the best doctor for you. you can schedule some time and she'll call you right on that appointed time and talk you through how we work. So you can book that right on our website.
And is there
Sounds good.
information about your membership options on there, or is it more
Yeah.
your concierge that would call and talk with them?
Yeah, we actually have the membership stuff on our website, but what we try to do is make it just a little bit easier for people to just get started with their doctor, have that initial hour-long consultation. So you get an hour with the doctor right out of the gate and really make your plan and understand what's happening. But we're going to support you through the entire process, Kay. We don't, we do a lot of hand holding, even though we're a virtual company. We do a lot of hand holding. There's a lot of touch points that we give you so that you're not out there trying to figure out everything on your own. It's a significantly guided process.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other questions? So you can manually raise your hand, or if you know where that little emoji is. I'd love to have a couple of you then just mention like what were your big takeaways? Like just one thing that you learned new from tonight.
You're overwhelmed.
Where do we start? Anne.
I'm not alone. That this is
Brava.
that I'm not the only one. I'm not alone. A lot of people, I feel like I've been working with Cindy and it's definitely helping. But when I talk to my friends, they're like, oh yeah, I'm a little older to be going through this. My friends are pretty much done. And it's nice to, not that I want anyone else to maybe have hot flashes and be uncomfortable or whatever, but it's nice to know you're not the only one and that this is something that many people's bodies and someone's working on it. There are things you can do to help it, but that you're not the only one.
That's great. Yeah, I'm so glad you said that. We women have to stick together, right?
Oh yes.
Yeah, because I think it's an honor to go through menopause. I mean, it's a little hell when you're doing it, but when you get to the other side, it's like, wow, this is great. I mean, you can actually feel your best on the other side of menopause. I do. I mean, I just feel like it can be a really like honorable transformational event for a lot of women.
That's where my friends are at and I'm not there yet. So I'm a little jealous.
I totally understand, but that's why you're here, right? To get the support of people who can actually help you. That's a really, really important thing. So yeah, I've been there. Probably many of us on this call have been there. And I think it's definitely something that we can help with, or somebody can help with in the functional medicine realm.
And I think a big part too is just realizing that we're all unique. And so how we go through these different transitions is going to be a little bit different than what somebody else would go through, but also realizing that as we go through these shifts in hormones and through the different stages of life as a woman, we do have to do things differently. So what we did in our 20s or 30s, we can't do in our 40s, 50s, 60s and beyond. We have to adjust along with our hormones.
I totally agree with that.
All right. Any last comments or questions?
I just add too that I think we all know it, but just a good reminder again of stress. Like if we don't stay on top of it, like I know this, but just yes, really need to pay attention to that. Just because you can doesn't mean you should. It's kind of one of my mottos, it's just learning to have boundaries and say no. And the quiet time and the protected time, I like you naming it, the protected time. Yeah, I need more of that.
Yes, I am 100% all about that. And if you need this slide deck and you need to put it like in your house someplace and have it just be on play so that the people in your house go like, oh, okay, it's like a real thing that mom actually does need to disappear for a bit. That's really, really important because this is the time, a lot of us have older kids and we have so many responsibilities and, marriages and partnerships and all kinds of things that are happening in our lives that, people come for us because we're so capable. We're as women, we're so capable. So yeah, protect that time, get yourself space. That's really, really important. Give yourself that permission. I do. I had to learn that though. It's important though. It's really, really important.
Awesome. Well, thank you, ladies, for joining us tonight. And I will be posting this on YouTube. So Lockhart Wellness Solutions, YouTube. And then also Dr. Mullen will be sharing it on her platform as well. So if you ever want to look at it again, you can have access to it. So again, thank you everyone for showing up. Thank you, Dr. Mullen. That was amazing.
Thank you, Cindy.
So very timely in regards to
Right.
what we're going through and what we need to hear and what we need to inspire us to make those changes.
Cool. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you very much.
Great night.
Take care. Bye.
Bye.